This is Anthony Willis, and we're listening to Monday Morning Critic podcast.
What are you going to do?
I don't know. Whisper something in your ear.
Good God almighty. You know, they put themselves in danger, girls like that.
It was a perverted thing to say.
You'd think you'd learn by that age, right?
Please lie down. What are you doing?
It's okay, hey, you're silent.
What are you doing? Hey, I said, what are you doing? Every week, I go to a club. I act like I'm too drunk to stand. And every week, a nice guy comes over to see if I'm okay.
You okay? You are so pretty. I am a nice guy.
Are you?
1, 2, 3, 4. I thought we had a connection.
Okay. How old am I? What are my hobbies? What's my name? Sorry, maybe that one's too hard.
Cassandra? We were in class together at Forest. You would have been a great doctor. What happened?
I left under unusual circumstances. You remember what happened, right? Why I dropped out. I'm not the only one who didn't believe it.
We get accusations like this all the time.
Who needs brains? They never did a girl any good.
I'm so sorry I didn't go with her.
You gotta let it go.
What are you going to do?
I don't know.
Why do you guys have to ruin everything? We were kids.
If I hear that one more time,
I have to give him the benefit of the doubt.
I was hoping you'd feel differently by now.
It's every guy's worst nightmare getting accused like that.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is? I wanted to be a doctor my whole life. Lately, I've been feeling like I might want to get back into it.
In the Wild West world of podcasting, there is one podcast that is authentic and genuine and continues to stand tall in its originality. Based on a passion for his guests, their work, and his love of podcasting, Derek Thomas and Monday Morning Critic Podcast get amazing, diverse, unique guests found nowhere else. The variety and quality are endless. There is something for everyone. Derek Thomas is the hero you deserve. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector. Welcome to Monday Morning Critic Podcast. Here is Derek Thomas.
Anthony Willis is an immensely talented composer. You can watch and listen to his work in Promising Young Woman, currently playing on HBO Max. Anthony, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm looking through your life here, and there's so much to process. You're a kid that grows up in London. And one, I've interviewed composers before. I'm not sure one has been a member of such a prestigious or listened to such a prestigious choir. St. George's Chapel. Tell me about those days early on, Anthony, because I know you credit, you've got a lot of other things going on in your life, and certainly in your resume and your history and your education, there's a lot to digest, but I think you credit some, if not a lot of it, to being a member of the choir at St. George's Chapel. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I think I have to. I was just surrounded in some of the world's most beautiful music, and it was what made to go to a school where you weren't cool unless you were in the choir, which is this extraordinary thing by I think contemporary standards of kids growing up today, to go to a school where being on the football team was if you were in the choir, and that was it's a strange feeling, but more than that, what I was aware I was stepping into at a very young age was this incredible heritage of making music, which I think seemed unbelievable that young boys could at the time. A lot of these choirs now are getting girls involved, but the original tradition was that young boys with unbroken voices would sing. And the fact that, I couldn't believe that when I started, the difficulty of music that they were reading. And it kind of, I think the pressure really that I was under every day to get up and deliver, it is sort of analogous to sometimes how I feel as a composer in LA, and actually not just composers, but everyone involved in music making, in Hollywood music making. When you first go to a session and you realize that this music's being sight read for the first time, it's beyond belief. But that was the kind of hot pool, feeling that I felt being thrown into to sing at St. George's, when I was very young.
Yeah, and I don't think people. I think Chapel makes it sound a little bit underwhelming because it is quite truthfully very stunning. I've never been there, but just looking and just researching it, my God, it's just this stunning place that is open to the public, right, Anthony?
It is, yeah. It's part of a tradition that is quite common in all these cathedrals, and really it's like a cathedral. It's a very large,
right? That's chapel. A better word. Yeah, I agree.
In Windsor Castle, but there are choirs for a lot of these cathedrals in York and Salisbury and Westminster and Canterbury, and these big traditional churches in England. And they're amazing places. And yes, there's a thing called Evensong, which anyone can go in from the public and hear this music, and it's a really wonderful tradition that's still surviving. I'd love to say thriving, but still surviving in England, like most things in the world right now are surviving or hoping to survive.
Yeah, for sure. And there is something. I was an altar boy in a much lesser. I wasn't in the choir, but listening at a much, I don't want to say lesser level because I don't want to downgrade anybody, but it was people that volunteered to be in the choir, and there's something really beautiful about that. Even though they weren't as fine tuned, I'm sure, as what you heard, there is something really beautiful about that. And I love when composers kind of put choir type music in their scores. I think there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, I love writing for the voice. Obviously, I'm not the first person to discover that it's a incredibly impactful musical resource for composers, and it's something that I obviously have a great love for, and but I think that the great thing about the voice is it has a place in any genre and in any score. I think as long as it's used in the right way. It's a very homogeneous human color. So, it's something that stayed with me. It's certainly, I think that, getting to sing this incredible music definitely trained my ear and trained my sense and understanding of harmony and voice leading to, when I moved to LA, to be able to work with some of the composers who'd come, the Henry Jackmans and John Powells and even Harry Gregson Williams, who Henry and Harry particularly were both choir boys too. So there's a shared language and a shared respect for the music that we'd all sung, and that was an amazing sort of jumping off point for me when I arrived here.
Yeah, and then you go on to study composition at Marlborough College, Wiltshire University of Bristol. Then you move into the States and you get your graduate degree at USC. How do you look at those times, Anthony? Is there a moment there that stands out? Because we're going to touch upon some of the people that I don't want to call them mentors, but perhaps mentor is a good word, that you've worked with along your journey. But looking back to your days of schooling, is there a moment or memory that sticks out that is that you're fond of? I'm sure there's tons, but
yeah, insofar as my journey as a composer, I definitely grew up feeling like I was the only one in my kind of very small musical environment that wanted to really write music. the choristers I was with were all brilliant readers and performers, and but I mean, I've told this story before, but I realized that I had, although I was a good reader, I certainly wasn't the best. And music when you're that age, as I said, can be pretty overwhelming in its complexity, and some of the stuff we were seeing was very difficult. But what I realized is I had a flute teacher actually who he gave me, Titanic had just come out, and he gave me just a lead sheet of the music for My Heart Will Go On, the James Horner song, and he's like, oh, just in case you want to play it. And rather than playing it on my flute, I was actually much more interested in figuring out the accompaniment. And just the fact that he'd penned the chords, the basic chords, I was like, oh, this isn't actually as hard as I thought. And so I saw the basic chords on the lead sheet, and it was a kind of penny dropping moment for me, because I suddenly realized there was a whole host of music that I'd kind of understood how to play, but not as much as I sort of had the confidence to.
Mm.
And that really, and then so I was then the one of my friends that could play by ear, and that was my kind of gateway into the anatomy of music and being able to hear things, understand them, and how they're built, and why they impact you emotionally the way they do. So that was a huge. So I really must credit my flute teacher for giving me that lead sheet, because it showed. I suppose the analogy I would say for that is that as a film composer, so much we do is about immediate, spontaneous impact. And I think you can get incredibly lost in the weeds of music theory, and not that it's not incredibly important. And I'm a huge stickler for detail, and everyone I've ever worked with is too. But this is music that, we're creating music that you experience it, I mean, hopefully many times, but it's at its most important just once, as you're sitting there in the theater. And just the immediacy for me in that moment of going, this is the main harmonic outline of this piece of music, was a big light bulb moment. And I was, I mean, this leads on, I'm sure, to what we'll talk about later, but I think just I was for a long time a bit lonely as a composer, because I was sort of the only person around me doing it. And so my journey was kind of figuring out, at school, which school I mean in the English sense, at St. George's and at Marlborough, kind of going, okay, well, how do I was lucky to go to wonderful schools, but nobody really knew about film music and what, how you'd even have a hope of doing it for a living. So it was kind of a solo journey, and all of my compositions were kind of me and a little, like, I started in Sibelius, so trying to pen things down, and then eventually started sequencing music. But it was kind of a solitary journey until really I moved to LA.
Yeah, Anthony, during all you went to some very prestigious schools. During all of that, do you ever have a professor or a teacher that has scored a television show, that has scored a movie to any degree? Do you because I'm thinking about what you're going through, and it does sound like a lonely journey. It's tough because, I mean, composers are not like the quantity is not as bountiful as actors, right? So do you have somebody along this journey that has scored something, whether it's at USC or in England? Do you ever run into that situation? Not until USC, and obviously the USC film scoring program is incredibly well connected. So right. But not until then. No, I mean, I did have my main music teacher at my high school, Marlborough. She was one of the first people that was sort of your music kind of sounds like film music. You should think about that. You should. And she herself, I don't think, knew a lot about the world, but she was kind of one of the first people that did sort of like just give me a little gentle nudge in that direction. And then when I ultimately moved to
to LA and, went to USC, that, suddenly Pandora's box was fully open to an amazing community, an amazing connection of alumni and all sorts of, industry professionals that are connected to the school in some way.
Yeah. And that would make sense. And, I wanted to ask you two questions and then kind of get back onto your journey with some of the people that have really influenced your life. And I love hearing stories like that, those people that nudge you in the right direction, those people that are super positive, whether they're actors or directors or composers. I love hearing those things. So two separate things for you, right? So today, knowing I was going to speak with you, and I love as I told you, your choral background. So I'm thinking of songs that I've heard that have a really prominent chorus in them, right? So Saving Private Ryan has a Hymn to the Fallen. Empire of the Sun is great. The Mission is filled with it. Game of Thrones, Gladiator, some really good stuff. Is there a piece that you're fond of because of your background, because of both in the choir and as a musician, as a composer, is there a piece of music that you're drawn to that you're blown away by? I'm sure there's many, but one specifically.
Oh gosh, I really ought to have these things on the tip of my tongue. Of course there are, and I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been a fan. I think most composers, they wouldn't like to use that word, especially once they're kind of working a lot. But we all started as fans, or we all started by being inspired.
Right.
I loved as a kid The Lion King, which
that's a great one. How did I forget that?
Yeah, and of course it's got a particularly beautiful choral aspect to it, which it's got more of an African flavored choral sound. So the timbre is that in a way that much more heartbreaking. And as Hans has done in a lot of his scores and music, and as we all should, he very much acknowledges Mozart in that score. There's a lot of kind of the timelessness of that story, which of course is kind of based on, and this starts to sound really pompous, but it's based on Shakespeare. And then the score prescription that he chose was very kind of Mozart infused. So there's a piece I did sing as a chorister called Ave Verum Corpus. And there's the moment when Mufasa dies in The Lion King that's very, very much an homage to that piece, but it's done in Hans's way, and it has African choir. And I've always loved that piece. It's incredibly beautiful, that cue, and moving as you watch Simba realize that, he's lost his dad.
Well, that's so well said. How did I forget that? Jesus. Like I was going through and I'm touching on these great movies, and sometimes animated movies, they slip them, and they shouldn't, because there's so many phenomenal ones, as you've been a part of as well. That's a great call. So the other thing I wanted to ask you was, I was reading this website, Classic FM, right? And they listed the 15 best scores of the 21st century, or scores particular to a movie. And, they Requiem for a Dream, Gladiator again, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, just a couple others. They had Pirates of the Caribbean, Atonement, Interstellar, Joker. Again, no Thomas Newman, and it wouldn't be by law, I have to bring up Thomas Newman because I think the world of the man, as I do Hans Zimmer and you and so many of these great composers. But again, Thomas Newman, who has gone 0 for 15 in Academy Award nominations, I've said this before, he is left off of this list of the 15 best scores of the 21st century. And I get it's subjective. Is there any do you think in some ways, and I almost feel silly asking this because I some people are going to say no way, but I feel to some degree Thomas Newman is underappreciated. Is that a ridiculous theory?
I think it's only going to become harder and harder to fit this ever vast landscape of beautiful scores into what kind of traditionally used to be more of a kind of clique of awards and a system to praise them. And I think that although Thomas Newman's sort of been around a long time, I agree. I think it just so happens that a list like that from Classic FM, which is obviously a wonderful, it's much like KUSC here in California. It's a really amazing classical music station, radio station. I mean, yeah, they can't fit them all. And I completely agree. I mean, Shawshank Redemption was one of my absolute favorite scores growing up as well. And, Beautiful Mind. I mean, if anything, I think that Thomas Newman's fault is that he's written too many good scores. So it's kind of which one do you go down with? But in terms of appreciated, I think he's immensely and rightfully revered in the community, as he should be, because he's such an imaginative. I mean, his American Beauty score, and I mean, just the amount. I think he was. Although I'm actually working on a film later this year that the directors told me is going to be temped with a lot of Thomas Newman and James Horner, and I was thinking, yeah, that's a nice kind of retrospective, more traditional scoring approach. And I'm really excited about it. But then I was like, well, that's not really fair on Thomas Newman. I mean, he always has been incredibly innovative with his style. Yeah, I mean, absolutely amazing. I think if anyone could have 1/10 of the career of Thomas Newman, they would be. They can happily die happy.
and a great one that's often left out is Road to Perdition. Anthony is one of the greatest soundtracks I have ever heard, scores I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
It's just he's just such a great variety to him. I wanted to ask you. So I spoke with two guys. I think you probably crossed paths with. I know on a project, but definitely in another avenue, which I'm going to mention, Matthew Margerson and Dominic Lewis. I'm pretty sure you guys have all crossed paths. Is that a correct assumption?
Absolutely, yeah. And I love them both, and I think they're both absolutely tremendous. And I've sort of come up in a similar pool of mentors as them, and I've also helped them out on a little bit on some of their projects as well. So yeah, absolutely tremendous guys, and like real kind of figureheads in the kind of next wave of composers, and also, well, should I say the current wave of composers, and sort of part of real sort of great friends in this community.
Yeah, and I have to say, the three of you, I am so excited about everything you guys are doing. Like now they're the wave of the future now in the future, as are you. So I am just so excited to see what the future has for the three of you, especially you, since we're talking now. I was talking to them because they co-composed, and I believe you helped out in Kingsman. Could you? How am I going to say? Let me figure out how I'm going to phrase this. I asked Matthew, how difficult it is because you have to check your ego at the door, and he completely agreed. Do you think that? Is a co-composing a situation that is? I guess any opportunity is a good one, but what are the downfalls to co-composing? Are there any? Or is it, find a way to mesh and work with somebody? Do you see any negatives to co-composing with someone?
It's a really great question. It's a really timely one as well, because we're seeing a huge rise in co-composing. And traditionally, I guess your agent would probably discourage you from co-composing because you're sharing the spotlight,
right?
And it really probably ought to have happened more traditionally on scores with big names where other composers are kind of coming in to help out. And I'm really excited to see a slightly more egalitarian shift as we have more and more streaming content with less lower fees, but the amazing bigger composers want to still be able to be a part of them, but it doesn't make sense business wise for them to dedicate completely all their time to it. So I think it's really great, and actually I think it's a really important in the conversation of like diversity and getting younger composers and giving them opportunities. It's a really great way to do that with, I think, the assurance of a really seasoned, A-lister even. So, and that, that's one way it happens. In the case of Dom and Matt, I think it's a very special, I mean, not to speak for them, but just knowing them, I mean, I think it's a very special situation because they've worked together sort of, they came up as additional composers together working with Henry, and they really know each other really well. So I think co-composing is, I'd say the pitfall to it is that if you were, it's really matchmaking that may or may not work well, depending on, the kind of workflow and aesthetic, what's the idiosyncrasies of each composer, how they complement each other and how they're going to work.
Right.
But it's great that you asked that, because I'm suddenly seeing a huge shift and more co-composing.
Yeah, and that's a great. And I want to kind of ask you a question about the remote control in Hans Zimmer School. But before I ask you that, so I want to get your take on this because you are a composer, you are a musician. I was reading, I think it was T-Pain, who's a rapper, I believe, was talking about how many streams it takes to make $1 on some of these platforms, right? So Amazon Music, a song has to be played 250 times to earn $1. I buy a lot of my music, so I don't really have any of these. But Apple Music 128 times, Pandora 752 times to make $1, Spotify 315 times to make $1. I mean, it is still in your realm because you are on many of these forums. What's your take on that? Spotify, is it? I feel like it's a mixed blessing, right, Anthony? Because in one sense, people are hearing your music, which is great. I mean, I hear it, I buy it, but there are those people that just listen, and it seems like an arduous way to make a buck. I mean, it seems like it's a long process for all the hard work you've done. What's your take on the Spotify's and that kind of whole thing and how that formulates?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your support, and of course, any music that you buy is massively appreciated because it's a huge margin. I think we're in this dangerous age where we're so used to being able to get everything as long as we're connected to the internet.
Right. And
suddenly when you're not, or you don't have your phone, in my case, you freak out because you suddenly, this incredible reach that you have into all these resources is suddenly gone. And it's, I don't know. I mean, this is a bigger point for another time, but I don't know how healthy that is for us. And of course that applies directly to music in that you don't need to own it if you're connected to the internet. You don't need to store it, but you can access it. And I think, I definitely think in a way, I think for composers now, there's a bigger pressure for us to have, I guess, a fan base of listeners and numbers speak, and social media following speak, especially as the focus of a lot of entertainment has moved away from, shall we say, not that cinemas are exclusive, but they're a more focused world. And now that the kind of consuming market's moved into your living room, it really matters that you have. I think it matters more and more to studios, not just that you'll do a great job, but that you have appeal, not just in your music, but there's already an audience for you, and I think therefore there are composers that might get hired. I mean, ultimately everyone wants people who are experienced, who are easy to work with, who will do a great job and bring something really special. But there's this market now. Like I don't know if you've heard of this, some very talented songwriters who wrote this fan-based Bridgerton musical, and they're kind of, they've got real power out of something they literally made in their bedroom, so anyway, I digress, but so it's wonderful that Spotify is there, and it enables your music to reach a lot of people. But at the same time, financially, it's really tough. And it's ironic that in a world that most music listening is done, especially now in, on digital platforms, that's how most people receive their music. Musicians really make money by going out on tour.
Right.
Which it's crazy. I mean, that any big artist, I mean, you know, of course, I'm sure Beyonce's doing okay from streaming, but makes way more money from touring. And so, no, it's hard. I mean, also, bear in mind that $1 that you mentioned, the composer very rarely gets all of that. They'll get a small amount because the record labels are also set up for for physical release. So the percentage you get is sort of set up on the basis that there's a lot more costs, that there used to be a lot more costs in actually putting music out. And so many labels now are moving to digital releases only, which means actually their costs are much lower than they used to be. So that's an interesting conversation that may or may not sort of open up. I hope it does, on behalf of composers and music makers, that really, I mean, the amount that we get from, you know, especially from film soundtracks, ought to be higher, because, you know, record labels aren't having to, you know, put as much money behind the record to get it made. That said, they themselves are getting a way smaller return because the streaming rates are so low. So their argument is, well, we're trying to stay in this to actually make this profitable, to even be worth our time putting this music out there, you know, to pay for mastering, pay for artwork. So yeah, I mean, sorry, that's a long.
No, it's a good answer though. It's a good answer, and I got to tell you, it leads to, like, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but it leads to many of these talented musicians like Springsteen, Bowie. I want to say Tom Petty's estate. They're selling their catalogs, and I find that remarkably sad. Like, I feel like, you know, it's selling away their life's work. I mean, they're compensated certainly for it, but I don't know. Is Bruce Springsteen's work worth $250 million? Was it all? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like this. The thing I brought up about the plays equaling them, I think that leads to people getting discouraged. By the way, YouTube Music is 1,250 views for $1, which is unbelievable. So I don't want to get too far off topic, but it's a little disheartening, because here I am. You mentioned the iPhone. What a great comment that was. Like, my iPhone is exactly that. It's my movies. It's my music library, and I own it. So I'm happy with that. It's a win-win for both people involved.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, it's a lot of accounting. You know, you guys, you look at it all and you go, wow, this is a wonderful system that results in, I mean, it you know, barely, I'm amazed it even covers the costs of the accountants, to be honest.
Right.
But not to be, you know, as you said, the positive is we're so lucky we live in a time where access is so huge. And I think that sort of, you know, comes back round to a little bit of what I was saying about when I was at school and I felt sort of so isolated in my quest to become a composer. And now here we are, and there's infinite access to everything. And it only makes you revere, you know, composers of old who had pen and paper and, you know, I guess they had more access to musicians because there was more domestic music making. But anyway, that's going off on a whole tangent. But essentially, the fact that we should feel really lucky that we grow up and we live in this time. I mean, you know, composers were now, and a lot of us are now working on rigs finally with one computer. It's like, wow, it's all on one computer. You know, some composers are even starting to test out their rigs with laptops only.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing time, and you know, the sample libraries are incredible, and it really is. I mean, the sky's the limit, and you can listen to any kind of music from anywhere in the world at any time. And it is miraculous, but it's also something I think we mustn't take for granted.
No, for sure. And Matthew laughed about this next comment when he was on the podcast. You know, he was talking about, you know, when I found out about there was actually like the Hans Zimmer remote control, like production, like it was like, I'm thinking it's this academy of, like, it's the equivalent of like a Jedi Academy at Star Wars, or like a school for wizards at Harry Potter, or like Top Gun where all the top pilots, like, the idea of this, I still can't wrap my head around it. I think it's the coolest thing I think I learned about in 2021. It was that Hans has this like academy that's like really pumping out these like super talented composers. I don't know. Talk about your experience there and what it meant to you.
I want a refund, and I want a Top Gun plane when I arrive. I think that everyone should think about it like that, and it's it's definitely a sink or swim environment, or at least it has been. I think it's becoming, of course, all the people who've been through it like to go, oh, in my day it was harder. And I think it is becoming easier because, again, I think the tech is becoming a lot simpler. You used and more affordable, and really it comes down to, I mean, this is slightly dull, but actually I think a lot of composers have cited this. I know, like Jeff Zanelli has mentioned this, that when he started out there, he was printing stems. And in those days, you had to print the stems one by one because they were in surround, and there wasn't the horsepower to do it any other way. And that's how he learnt to arrange in Hans's way, because he's listening to every single thing. So that slightly takes the edge off the glamorous lightsaber. But, it's kind of... So anyway, the tech's become easier because I think, you used to have to print all these stems, and most composers didn't have two rigs. You'd have a rig, and the stem printing had to be done at night. I mean, when the composer left for the day, because it's got to be delivered to the mix. And it's not something you can sort of explain. Oh, sorry, the music can't be delivered because, we've got to do this thing where we print the stems. And it is extraordinary, really. It's like, well, all you're trying to do is get each component of a piece of music out so it can be nicely remixed by the mixer. But you wouldn't believe how complicated that has been historically on composers' rigs. And, they've obviously always been pushing the envelope to sort of run as many computers and to get the best sounds, and to run a really good sound. Sometimes you used to need a whole computer just for that one library. And now we've kind of caught up to this point where, at least for now, it might be suddenly that there's a whole new generation of composing samples that suddenly needs so much more processing. But we've kind of maxed out at the point, not maxed out, but we've hit this point where it's, the playing field has been leveled. In terms of, even kids leaving USC for not a devastating amount of money can buy some really good libraries. Because also, I mean, that's the other thing I think about working for A-list composers like Hans, is that he was the one that got in there and made these amazing libraries that unless you worked with him, you couldn't make your music demos sound like that. You just couldn't. And now we're at a different place where these commercial libraries are as good, and if not better than some of those old libraries that have been kind of used for a long time. But anyway, to talk about so I focused on the negative aspect, but I do think it's a really sort of important thing that's happened in our industry, because it's been like pretty dysfunctional, really, to be a composer's assistant, and a pretty hard graft. And I think that now it's becoming becoming much sort of friendlier for people to come in and just focus on music. That said, I mean, obviously the standard of music that's been made, over there is incredible, and those scores, and the generation of composers that Hans himself gave birth to, and I've been incredibly lucky to then work with them. So there's this amazing family of people that have come from, this thing that was started by one man.
Yeah, and do you have those, like, I asked this to Matthew as well, do you ever have those moments with Hans there where it's a one-on-one where you're just talking, composition, you're talking movies, you're talking music? Are there any moments with just you and Hans that kind of unfold that way? And I realize my view is probably a little bit maybe naive, but like I just, the way I see things. But are there moments where the two of you have one-on-one moments where you're just talking music and composition and movies?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to close the loop on what I was saying about, my journey being lonely, when I was starting out.
Right.
Part of my sort of time here in LA has been spent trying to build a career, but also finding this amazing kind of community and shared knowledge and shared instinct. And you suddenly go, wait, you get me. We get each other. This is a shared language and a shared dramatic intention. We understand each other. It's a really, it's like the cliche of like, you feel seen. You feel like there's all this sort of time alone in your bedroom trying to, patch a load of sounds together to make something. You're in the mecca for that. I myself have, although I've been lucky to spend a little bit of time around Hans. I mean, I've mainly worked on projects with Henry Jackman and mainly John Powell, who's been my number one mentor.
Right.
Absolutely, I think that the moments where you kind of know you've reached happiness as a composer is when you're talking to a composer that you immensely respect, and you're working with them on their score, and you feel that sort of connection where you both are looking to create the same thing, and it's a wonderful moment. And at that moment, it doesn't matter that they've how many awards that they've got and how many famous directors they've worked with. You and them are in this moment where the music's the thing that you're connecting over, and it's really been one of the most special parts of my experience, kind of coming up under those composers.
Yeah, and John Powell, I feel like, is a really underrated. He's got awards, he's got this phenomenal filmography, but in many ways, I think he's very underrated. What do you like best about collaborating with him? I'm sure there's many things, but what makes John such a special mentor, Anthony?
Gosh, it's hard to explain, but he's unlike any other composer in that he's always calm, kind, inspiring, incredibly egalitarian, and just really, he's just really supportive, and of course brilliant. I mean, that's the thing that I think if he sat there and did nothing, you'd go, oh, John's a lovely person, but it's the fact that he's so lovely, and yet what's going on with the cogs turning as he approaches things. And he's also incredibly unpretentious. It's everything he does is for the love of doing it well. He's just a terrific and incredibly lovely mentor and absolute genius.
And you mentioned an animated movie, The Lion King, when I asked you that question earlier. I'm going to tell you one of the best pieces of music I've heard in recent memory is Test Drive from How to Train Your Dragon. Like, I must listen to that on a loop. There's times where I can't stop listening to that song. Like, it just explodes. It's one of the greatest pieces of music I think I've heard in the last decade.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that score. I think, before I moved to USC, I moved to LA, and I was trying to explain to sort of some of my family what it was why was I leaving my home. And, I think they basically thought that I was trying to go on a joy bender in LA and, get a tan and go to the beach. And I, of course, as a 22-year-old or whatever I was, I did want that a little bit too, but I saw that film, I saw Dragon 1 right as I was about to leave. And I took a girl on a date there, and I was a lot more interested in the film than I was in her. And I think she was like, oh, so this is what you want to do? And I was like, absolutely. And that film just leapt off the screen, and the score just leapt off the screen. And it was amazing. It was, and it's been a big part of my life. And, I was lucky that John then recommended me to do the How to Train a Dragon Homecoming, which was the holiday special which came at the end of the film series. We spotted the film together. And I think, back to my thing with kind of co-scoring, often when it comes to sort of the wisdom that you get from a composer like John or Henry or Hans or Harry, it doesn't often need a lot of their time, but just in approach, just to kind of literally point the ship in the right direction and say, this is what you should do. Because essentially these guys have done so much. They've done it so many times. They've got, I mean, to use your analogy, they do have kind of a Jedi sense. Because obviously music in its essence is so hard to make. It's, you know, it takes a lot of, just to write a tasteful piece of music takes a lot of work, but it's writing the right music and not getting so lost in the weeds of, oh, but I'm so into this piece of music. And you go, oh, you know what? The psychology of this just isn't right for this film. It's bringing things into your thoughts that aren't the right things. As much as it's beautifully done and incredibly crafted, isn't the right thing. And having, you know, as I said, these composers who've been doing this a lot, they are amazing at translating from the film world into the musical world. So it's the best possible thing you can have. And as I had on Dragon Homecoming, not only had I been a part of John's process on Dragon 2 and Dragon 3 and seen firsthand how he went about doing a sequel and refreshing the sequel with new character themes, but also honoring the existing themes and how he used them and how he bound it all together. But John spotted Dragon Homecoming with me, and you know, the director of that, ironically, was one of his very first animated directors. I think the first, actually, Tim Johnson from Ants. So it's a really trippy moment for me where I just felt this kind of, I'm in this sort of, to me, what was like, you know, modern animation history. And square one of that was, you know, I guess we've already mentioned, as The Lion King, which then led to, you know, through Jeffrey Katzenberg and Hans's relationship, led to DreamWorks Animation. And so that was an incredible moment for me. And John, you know, we spotted it and looked at it together, and he, you know, he just made a few suggestions about the new themes that I should write. But that, as I said, that sent the ship off in the right direction. And it was a lovely way for me to kind of pay homage to what I loved about, you know, what he'd done in the features. And then I was lucky that DreamWorks liked it so much they put a little soundtrack out, which, you know, back to your point about visibility in Spotify, you know, has been lovely. You know, I get a lot of messages from How to Train Your Dragon fans, and they say, oh no, we love listening to your score. And so anyway, that was a lovely kind of full stop on that, you know, How to Train Your Dragon. It's a huge part of my life that I feel, you know, there's a few moments in life I think you have dreams, and, you know, hopefully everyone gets to experience one that comes true like that, because that was very much for me, and what, you know, and in general working with John has very much been a dream come true. Yeah,
pretty awesome moment. And I'll leave John by saying that there's a moment in Solo when Han Solo and Lando Calrissian are approaching the Millennium Falcon, and they're seeing it for the first time. I have tears coming down because John's music is just pumping. And I know you were on this project too, I believe. And the music is just pumping. Like the choice of music, it's just, I have tears coming down my face, and my then girlfriend, now wife, it looks at me and says, like, what is wrong with you? I go, I can't. I mean, I feel like Star Wars has come up more than I wanted to in this interview, but like, it's just such a great moment. And people are like, I tell people, you want to see a great moment and why scores are just, why I love them so much. Just watch that. It's a great movie. It's an underrated movie, but watch that scene. It's just, I don't know. It's stunning and beautiful on every level.
I completely agree. And I think it typifies what everyone strives for, or all composers strive for, is that the notes themselves, you know, I mean, I could play you a crude version of what that is on the piano, and you go, yeah, that's, you know, and then we could write those out as a list. We could write those note names out as a list. And you go, well, that just looks like a list of letters. You go, yeah, it is. But great music is worth exponentially so much more than the sum of its parts. And a great theme and a great tune, it isn't like a mathematical thing. It's an emotional thing. And I don't know what it is about us that we react and resonate to them that way. But that moment and that scene in particular, I completely agree, is one of those moments where it's like to the power of what the sum of its parts.
Yeah, great stuff. And I want to end the interview just talking about Promising Young Woman. Before I get to that, so one of my guilty pleasures, and I don't have a ton of time for it, but I do love it, is Fortnite. Tell me about your work with Fortnite and what you've done with Fortnite. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a really another a fun sort of facet that I guess unexpected, and I think when we get to talking about Promising Young Woman, well, there'll be lots of unexpected stuff, but and I think like you have these, I guess like Dragon, you have these goals and you hope that they come true, but most of the time they don't, but they turn into something else, the pursuit of energy in the right direction. And I think for me that was how Fortnite came about, and I was lucky to come on to write some of the game is constantly evolving. And so there's always a need for more music. So I work with Epic Games to write. I've done quite a few little seasons for them. One was a holiday season. It was very Christmassy. So it was kind of like, okay, how can we take this Fortnite aesthetic that's actually generally pretty propulsive and modular and contemporary and add this kind of Christmassy spin on it? And then, really I had to commend the amazing audio team at Epic Games, because they, you think that they just want kind of conventional video game music, but really they have an amazing sort of, amazingly imaginative vision. And, I did this piece for solo cello that, they sort of said, yeah, we're thinking, and they sent me this reference, and it was like one of those YouTube videos of like a cello cover done by those amazing guys that kind of do these, they do all these covers for cello. And I was like, God, that's not what I expected they'd want at all. But, kudos to them. And I worked with Tina Guo, who's an amazing cellist who, is a big sort of supporter of all composers and, a composer herself. And I just knew that she was the right sound for this. And, so I've had like a lot of fun doing different kinds of music for the game. And, back to kind of streaming and access of all my music that's had, I mean, unfortunately the soundtracks aren't really available on general platforms, but they're always on YouTube. They're kind of ripped on YouTube.
Right.
So I don't think I'll ever see a cent from that. But in terms of fan access, the volume of people that listen to this music after the fact and comment, and if you're ever having a bad day as a composer and you've written for Fortnite something like that people like, that will put a smile on your face, because there's just the love that fans have for that music, and especially this cello piece I mentioned, and that really is, obviously as a composer you want to survive, but you do want to reach people and touch them and have them, again, back to this kind of lonely composer in a room analogy. That's what you're trying to. That's why you went there. You didn't go into the room to escape the world. You went there because you were inspired to try and recreate the feeling that the music has given you. And then so any moment you kind of get a glimmer that you've managed to do that for other people is really the name of the game, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And when millions of people are listening to it, absolutely, you're reaching people. The stage doesn't matter. If you can reach people with your music, I think that's like you said, that's a huge thing. And thank you so much for all this time. I wanted to end the interview talking about Promising Young Woman. Absolutely phenomenal movie, fueled by a wonderful score. So how well did you know Emerald Fennell at Marlborough College? Did you know her really, really well? Because I feel like her confidence in you, Anthony, was, just from my reading, was enormous.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, Emerald is a one in a billion person, really. I mean, I didn't know her at Marlborough, actually. We were at the school at the same time, coincidentally, but I knew of her, and she certainly, I think, I mean, I was in a singing competition. I've got to ask her if she remembers it. She might vaguely, and it was in my first year. I peaked, my sort of singing career at Marlborough peaked in the first year where I sang Bohemian Rhapsody, and then my voice broke and I couldn't sing as high anymore. So, that was my sort of moment of fame. So if she was aware of me, that would be what she'd remember. But I was aware of her because she was in all the school plays and was just an amazing actor, and kind of, you could just tell she was somebody that was really driven and just has a kind of, she just has an intelligence that she just wears in a very kind of kind way. She's not somebody that looks down her nose at anybody, but she herself is just wonderfully confident. And you know, as I think the world found out, all of this, you know, is just a brilliant mind. So we didn't know each other well. Coincidentally, I met her at a party, or sort of, I suppose, technically reconnected with her at a party, and she'd been in Pan, which I'd just done some additional music for, of the scene that she was in, and she was a flight commander, and you know, right when they're all trying to escape to Neverland, she was the you know, she was trying to she was sort of the flight commander in the war room, planning this whole assault during the Blitz, you know, in Joe Wright's Pan. And yeah, so we sort of got talking, and then, you know, became friends, and you know, and would run into each other at things. And eventually she just said, you know, I really want to get your advice on this film I'm doing about composers. And she said, I'm working with Britney and Wagner and Mozart. And I was thinking, damn, that's a really interesting combo. I can't picture for the life of me what that film would be. But what I immediately knew is that she was an incredibly interesting and daring filmmaker. And I also knew that she has a love for music and is pretty musical herself. So anyway, you know, I treated it really as any friend would, and just sort of said, well, you know, let me make sure you're getting lots of composers come your way, you know, that you could look at. And then eventually she sent me the film, and she says, well, why don't you write something? And I think she was really doing it out of respect for the fact that I, you know, wanted to support her. I don't know. I mean, somebody other than me would have to ask her, how seriously were you thinking of Anthony to compose your film, or were you just sort of trying to do it? But I think, I mean, she knew that I'd come from a sort of thematic background. And I think a lot of the composers she had been talking to, you know, probably had really interesting textural ideas. But Emerald's sort of amazingly cool, but also a bit of an old soul. So I think she kind of, on her shopping list for Promising Young Woman, I think she wanted a score that acknowledged in some way the kind of history of cinema and a film score. She wanted her thematic, she wanted her theme for her movie, which was obviously challenging because the movie itself has such a rich soundtrack of pop songs and other musical choices that Emerald had made for the film. So, you know, it was, in many ways, I think the films like that are harder to do because you're balancing so much culture and so many cultural references and associations and sounds. Whereas if you know, How to Train Your Dragon is amazing as it is, in a way, the kind of the ball's in your court. So anyway, I watched the film and I wrote a theme for her, and I didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And, you know, I think, to be fair to her, I think she responded quite quick, just saying, I really love it the more I listen, or something. And I thought, okay, that's a nice, polite thing. I've done what I could to help, you know, and I think she was curious, what would that thematic score sound like? And then she came back to me and said, you know, I want you to do the score. And you know, and actually I'm loving the kind of thriller tones and kind of almost Hitchcock nods that you have in some of the, in some of your demos. And she really kind of sculpted and pushed me to do something that was a counterpart to the, you know, to the pop songs, as opposed to something that was trying to be born out of them. You know, right. She wanted the score to kind of be its own spine of the movie, and, you know, to support Carey Mulligan's amazing sort of journey through all these different experiences she had, you know, be a through line.
Yeah, and you know, the fact that this, from the outside looking in, it seems like such a tough project to score, right? Because it's comedy, it's a thriller, it's horror, it's shocking. There's a sadness to it. So there's no, I mean, it's a very diverse score, and a score, again, I've told you that I really think the world of. But what I really love about your music is that we never really see or hear, we never really hear Nina, but we do hear her in your music, right? You're giving her that voice, which I think is so really impressive, Anthony.
Thank you so much. I mean, you know, that was very much the goal. It was like how, you know, Nina is the elephant in the room, and what happened to her is what, you know, set this whole thing in motion. And so, you know, and that's something that, you know, again, you know, back to the sort of mentors I've had, those are the things in film scoring you look for in terms of the storytelling. Like, where's the place for this music to live? And absolutely, it was the theme was actually really kind of a longing sort of lullaby in its kind of simplest form, of, you know, a friendship between two women and you know what that friendship might have been. And I like to think that theme, if you made a different movie that was, you know, Promise a Young Woman, where nothing had ever gone wrong, you could still use that theme, but you'd just do it in a different way. You'd arrange it and harmonize it in a different way. And so that was how I brought Nina into the score. And it was her theme for, it wasn't just Cassie's theme, it was a theme that they shared, and right into kind of the romance that Cassie has. And obviously, you know, without spoiling anything too much, of course, the romance itself is very much wrapped into what happened to Nina. So, yeah. And, you know, of course, and the voice, you know, I saved the solo voice for the, you know, the cue where you see the videotape, which on the soundtrack's the first track, called Hymn for Nina.
Yep.
But, you know, also, you know, we developed this kind of synth voice pad that's kind of in a lot of the cues, and it evokes this sort of ghost of Nina, you know, it's sort of a lot of the, you know, throughout the score, really.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful moment. The romance suite, I mean, like I said, top to bottom, it's pretty amazing. My last two questions for you are, you know, it must be fun to because you talk about wanting to feel good as a composer. Go to YouTube and the, you know, the way that you use Britney Spears and Toxic, people fell in love with that. I mean, that's just such a clever way to use someone's music, right? So you're scoring and you're still using, you know, someone's music, a very popular song, in such a creative and fun way. That has to be a blast for you as a composer, Anthony.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, you know, I think that track really was the perfect storm. You know, I'm very grateful, super grateful, and so happy to see, you know, how it was received. But you know, it was something, I think Emerald, she knew that. I think she tried cutting in some Mozart there, something very epic. And then she knew that a Britney song was just going to sort of slowed, a creepy Britney song was going to be brilliant there. So it was very much her vision. And I was, you know, the lucky composer with the job to do it. And, you know, it's in itself an amazing lyric, you know, and the reason I say it's a perfect storm, that the whole movie, you've been hearing these very almost bombastically on the nose covers, you know, It's Raining Men, just hitting you in the face in a wonderful way, you know, dripping in irony. And then you see, you've sort of been taught throughout the film that you're going to get these fun covers. And then Toxic was the sort of one that broke the rule. Not only was it it was that moment where the score and the songs kind of met together. So structurally, you knew in that moment in the movie that you were kind of crossing a line. And of course, the way that we did it was that you're sort of not quite sure what it is at first, and you're kind of going, "What is this?" And so it's more of a Trojan horse that sort of gets delivered to you, and it sneaks up on you. And I think that's the thrill that everyone really enjoyed, because it sort of breaks the rule of, and of course it's an instrumental, so the lyric is in your ear because you know it so well, but on the other hand, it's not actually there. So and of course, as I said, the string riff is one of the great string riffs. So it was, and an amazing sort of design of the photography and everything sort of just came together for that scene. And so I'm the very lucky person that gets to take credit for it, but it was really a perfect storm of just a lot of brilliant, some really brilliant filmmaking from Emerald.
Yeah, and the movie does hit you hit me like a sledgehammer. But I do have to say, of the non-scored music, I just love the way Juice Newton and Just Call Me Angel is used at the end. I was just one of those moments in cinema where you're like, this is just fantastic. Like, it's just from the score to the director to the actors involved. Ending on that moment, and I'll be vague with how it was used. I thought it was so perfect.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and the tone. I think the tone that song brings is very specific. It's a very special. It's a very cool, slightly bizarre tone that you get there, and it had to be, because by that point in the movie, again, not to spoil it, there's nowhere else to go.
Right.
So it had to be something that was not routine in terms of how it makes you feel. My personal favorite is shortly before that. Again, not to give any spoilers, but it's the song from The King and I, Something Wonderful. And it's just the greatest contrast of could imagine, and it works brilliantly.
And Moon River too, a great way to use. There's just so much to it,
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's all brilliantly chosen by Emerald. I mean, she's got just a great sort of sensibility.
Anthony, what's around the corner for you? Future projects? Anything you wanted to throw out there?
I've got some things cooking. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what they are yet. It's one of those strange worlds where the internet probably knows, but I'm not allowed to say.
I don't want to get you in any trouble, so yeah, okay.
But no, I mean, I'm working, which I'm very grateful for, and of course, it's sort of the challenge when you get to work on a project like Promising Young Woman or a lot of the other kind of projects I've worked on, and you want to kind of keep doing those ones. So that's the blessing of having too much of a good thing. The curse of having too much of a good thing, I should say. That you want to kind of keep working with those amazing people, and keep sort of, you have to also keep reinventing yourself, which is tiring but rewarding.
Anthony, I got to say, enormous fan of your work, and I'm so excited for the future as a fan, and for you, wishing you all the best and a safe and a happy New Year as well.
And to you, Derek, thank you. I so appreciate having a chance to talk. It was really nice.
Thank you for listening to Derek Thomas and Monday Morning Critic Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also connect with Monday Morning Critic on Instagram and Facebook, MDM Critic on Twitter, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are found. All episodes available, www.mmcpodcast.com.